Hi all, I am Dana Floberg and this is Free Press Live, brought to you by Free Press, a nonprofit, nonpartisan media reform advocacy organization. Free Press Live is your weekly source for updates and live discussion of what's happening in the world of communications rights. You can learn more about our work at freepress.net. Today, my colleagues Joe Torres, co-creator of the Media 2070 campaign, and Vinikia Williams, campaign manager for the Media 2070 campaign, join us to discuss their work calling on the Federal Communications Commission to reckon with its history of white supremacist policies and to build towards reparations for our media system. We'll talk about all of that and more on this episode of Free Press Live. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back with the headlines. Hello and welcome back. I'm Dana Floberg and this is Free Press Live. On today's show, we'll be talking with Joe Torres and Vinikia Williams about building for media reparations. To kick us off, here are some news headlines from around the world of media and communications rights. During a visit to New York and New Jersey in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida's destruction, President Biden warned the country that the lethal impacts of this natural disaster are the direct result of climate change, and that action is needed to prevent extreme weather patterns from worsening. Areas of both states were declared major disaster zones after torrential rain and catastrophic flooding last week. The White House also sent Congress an urgent funding request for recovery aid, forecasting that billions more would be necessary to respond to Hurricane Ida. Both President Biden and state-level officials emphasized the need not only for recovery funds, but investment in infrastructure that would identify and fix system vulnerabilities to prevent this level of damage from happening again. In a related story, last week, the FCC's Wireline Competition Bureau issued an order waiving certain rules to assist participants in the Lifeline program, who are located in areas affected by Hurricane Ida in Louisiana and Mississippi. The Lifeline program offers low-income families a modest subsidy to help them afford basic communication services like phone and internet. In normal circumstances, Lifeline providers are required to de-enroll any Lifeline subscribers who subscribe to a free service and don't use their service for a period of 30 days. In light of the damage to communications infrastructure wrought by Hurricane Ida, however, this waiver will allow Lifeline participants to keep their benefit even if their service was disrupted. In the world of broadcast media, last Friday, the FCC released its fifth report on the ownership of broadcast radio and television stations in the United States. The data shows that in 2019, only 1.3% of US full-power commercial TV stations were Black-owned, along with only 2% of commercial FM stations, despite the fact that Black people make up more than 14% of the US population. The FCC data also indicate that people of color own just 6% of the nation's full-power television stations, 7% of commercial FM radio stations, and 13% of commercial AM radio stations, even though they make up about 43% of the US population. Free Press Senior Director of Strategy and Engagement Joseph Torres commented, "We already knew the historical scale of the FCC's failure to promote diversity in ownership. These numbers only illustrate the depth to which the agency has fallen in fulfilling this commitment. The FCC has been and continues to be the chief architect of an unjust media system that harms the Black community and other communities of color through stereotypical narratives. It's now up to the FCC to do everything within its power to stop excluding Black people from media ownership opportunities and adopt policies that create a more just media system that's more accountable to the people it serves. Which is very apropos for our conversation today. Today we are talking with Joe Torres and Vinikia Williams about the latest push in the Media 2070 campaign for media reparations. Joe and Vinikia, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Dana.
Just to give a little bit of an introduction on our guests, Joseph Torres is the Senior Director of Strategy and Engagement at Free Press, as well as the co-creator for the Media 2070 project. He advocates in Washington, D.C. to ensure that our nation's media policies serve the public interest and builds coalitions to broaden the movement's base. He's also the co-author of News for All the People, a New York Times bestseller narrating the history of race in American media. Vinikia Williams is the Media 2070 campaign manager, where she supports the Free Press team in the development, design, and successful implementation of the Media 2070 campaign for media reparations. So to set the stage a little bit for our conversation today, since a police officer murdered George Floyd last year, the ensuing racial reckoning has forced many media institutions to acknowledge their history of racism. But newsrooms aren't the only ones responsible for the systemic racism that exists in our media. Federal media policies have also played a foundational role in perpetuating the myth of Black inferiority, a myth that undermines Black lives and dignity every day. On today's show, we'll be talking with Joe and Vinikia about their work pushing the Federal Communications Commission to reckon with its own harmful history as we dream up media reparations. So, to do some just very quick table setting, Joe, Vinikia, you both work on the Media 2070 project. For some of our newer viewers, can you share a little bit more about that work?
I'll kick it off and then hand it to you, Joe. But Media 2070, we are a group, a collective, a consortium of media makers and activists. And we do the work of making sure that we can collectively dream futures where Black people own, create, and get to distribute their stories without harmful policies, government interventions, and we can dream up just futures. And so we do that in a multitude of ways, some of which we'll talk about in a bit, but I do want to hand it off to one of the founders of the project. Joe, what is Media 2070?
I appreciate it. Thank you, Dana and Vinikia. You know, like Colette Watson, who is a senior director, senior vice president of the organization, and Alicia Bell, who's the Media 2070 director, are co-creators, and I had the privilege of being a co-creator with them on the Media 2070 project that we actually launched October 6th, my date, if I remember correctly, of 2020, last year. And we started working on this project in 2019 as a way in which there was a lot of discussion that year. There was a lot more news coverage of reparations, right? It was a really important congressional hearing on it, the Judiciary Committee. There was a presidential race where the presidential candidates were being forced to address reparations in the Democratic Party. And we wanted to, we believe that in reparations, but also for the Black community, but also the role the media has played in anti-Blackness in the history of this country, but through the narratives that it tells. And in order to achieve a more reparative future, we have to address the media structures that exist, the media institutions that exist that continue to protect white racial hierarchies through anti-Black narratives. And so we launched this project with a 100-page essay, and in last October, that kind of has a framework, that documents some of this histories from the colonial times to the present of anti-Black narratives, anti-Blackness in our media system and media policies. And now we're in the process of building that consortium, as Vinikia is saying to help change media institutions, not just the institutions, but media policy as well, the institutional and structural racism that exists in our society. And if we achieve media reparations, like what would media reparations look like? It's what we're trying to figure out right now. But we know if we're successful with reconciliation repair, the anti-Black narratives, the myth of Black inferiority, these narratives will be deconstructed, and in the myth of white superiority will be deconstructed and no longer exist if we are successful. So that's how we know we've kind of arrived. Now we're just figuring out. We'll continue to figure out how to get there, and that's part of the project's trying to figure out.
Yeah, thank you, Vinikia, and thank you, Joe, for letting our viewers know all this incredible work that you have been doing. Mm-hmm. Something that we've mentioned a couple times so far on this show. This week, we're asking our viewers to sign on and share a petition calling on the Federal Communications Commission to investigate the agency's own history of racism in the name of pursuing media reparations. Can you share with us how you would define that term, media reparations, which might be a newer concept for some of our viewers?
We got great advice from someone who has been fighting for reparations for the Black community for a long time. And her advice was, we're trying to build this plane as we fly it, right? And we're trying to create worlds that doesn't exist. One of the things I really love about this project is that it believes in Afrofuturism. It uses Afrofuturism in our organizing in order to dream of new worlds, right, that haven't exist. So at the very basis of reparations is reconciliation and repair, right? And so how do we reconcile this history? Because as we've seen, just the process of raising a question about reconciling history is a very it's very politically challenging, right? Folks don't want to reconcile that history, right? There's efforts to not teach that history and not address the structures that were built that continues to create the unjust conditions that exist today. And so we're trying to reconcile we're trying to address that, and then the repair is how do we make a community whole? Yeah. And that's what reparations is about, how to make a community whole. And so yeah, I can stop there, but that's what we're trying to figure out in the media space. There's reconciling happening this past year, a little bit, but we need to reconcile more and then to understand what the repair is. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. What I'll add to that, there is the aspect of reconciliation that we would hope for, but there's this element of reckoning that needs to happen first, right? So it's confronting the ways in which, since the inception of America, a narrative has been told about the inferiority of some, the superiority of others. And so how do we begin to not just have a new flavor of lies? How do we begin to tell the truth? And how do we begin to build trust that has never fully been established when people are encountering, whether it's radio, television, written, print news, because we've seen in the past, the truth isn't always told about us or to us. And so reparations would look like that reckoning and that deconstructive work that would then construct those new worlds that we're dreaming up and imagining. And ultimately those things would lead to that just future where all things are reconciled.
Absolutely. And I mean, the first step to reconciling any history is we have to name it, right? We have to acknowledge it. We have to see it. And we've seen some of that work. We've seen some newspapers recently issuing apologies, acknowledging their own participation in and their history of furthering white supremacy. But this petition that we're talking about today is addressed to the FCC, not to media outlets. So can either of you share with us how the FCC, through its policies, has helped to perpetuate white supremacy in our media system?
Yeah, the FCC was created in 1934. It was it was the first time the federal government created a regulatory body to regulate commercial broadcasts was the Federal Radio Commission, 1927. Then it led to the creation of Federal Communications Commission, which exists to this day. And they were, and you know, for the first several decades of radio industry, and then the first several decades, like first, you know, when radio began commercialized in the late 1920s and into the 1930s, 40s, you know, all the stations were given out to white owners, you know, and this is the public airwaves, right? So if you think of the public airwaves, these companies like NBC that still exist, CBS, were getting all the most powerful radio stations, and they were able to use the power and the wealth they were generating from using the public airways given to them for free, a free license by the FCC, to become the dominant broadcast owners and so forth and so on, right? And meanwhile, Black folks were excluded by just from the ability to, it wasn't a law written down saying Black folks could not receive a license. There was efforts early on in the 1930s, in late 1920s, folks were trying to obtain a broadcast station in New York City, but weren't unable to. So there were efforts, folks were thinking about it, but the FCC did not give this license out. They gave these license out. They didn't give this license out to Black folks and other folks of color. The first Black owner of a radio station happened in 1949 in Atlanta, Jesse Blayton. And that's well in 2 decades into commercial radio. Like commercial radios are basically fully formed by then. The first Black owner of a television station didn't happen until 1973, right? That received the license in Detroit. Television was fully formed by then. And so you just read those statistics at the start of the program, right? The current FCC statistics on ownership that just came out a few days ago show what Black ownership of television stations, full power commercial television stations, was at 1%, right? And for radio stations, I think FM radio stations, I think that you read the number 2%, right? Or maybe a little more than that, but that, and then overall 6% of full power television stations owned by people of color, 43% of the population. This is not what a healthy democracy is. If the idea of those who control the airways and news and information is controlled by large mega corporations that are not accountable to local communities, and it's an unjust media system. So the FCC's decisions of who to award these broadcast stations to, who to award, has played a role in the structural racism that exists, and they continue to not address it. That's the thing. They continue to not address it. They continue to allow further consolidation to happen because these companies are powerful. And so when you know your policies are harming communities of color, it's intentional, right? It's not neutral. It's intentional. So that's why we have this petition going, and we hope folks can sign the petition, because we I'll wrap it up by saying Congressman Bowman with Congresswoman Clark and others, more than 20 members of Congress call on the FCC to examine its history of racism and conduct an equity audit. We have this petition calling on in support of what the Congress folks are doing, to Congressman Bowman and others, to call on the FCC to examine and investigate its own history, just like these newspapers, like the Los Angeles Times, Kansas City Star last year, apologize for its history of racism. More papers need to do the same. But the federal government, the FCC, needs to acknowledge its history of racism. And the last thing I say, they gave broadcast stations out to white supremacists, to folks who were upholding, members of the White Citizens Councils. There was a station in DC that was owned by the KKK that became a CBS station, an organ of the KKK. So we also have to unveil that history of all the folks who were upholding white supremacy, were members of the White Citizen Councils that had broadcast licenses, so forth and so on. So it's a lot to reckon with, basically. As Vinikia said, we have to reckon with that. And we haven't done that.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's really important, and I think we can clearly see the impacts today of these historical and present harms. And this conversation around repairing those harms is a vital one across a number of different issues. What makes it so important for media systems, specifically, when we're talking about the kinds of harms that racial injustice and systemic racism has had in media? what really crystallizes that for you as far as makes this an issue that's worth addressing in a separate way and with this kind of visioning and work?
Well, Vinika, I think like it's just what does it produce, right? It's like what is the end result? What is the narrative that's produced? How has it harmed uh, the black folks and communities of color, right? And is the history, like the media system is no different than any other system that was created. It wasn't created to help black people, wasn't helping to help people of color, right? It was oppressive. It was there to uphold the agenda of a white racial hierarchy, a capitalist white racial hierarchy, so forth and so on. And so, if I'm answering your question correctly, that is what continues to this day. And I'll stop there. And Vinika, you have any thoughts on that too?
What I would add to that, the importance of addressing this system, particularly within the overall fight for reparations, what we've seen and what we have to continue to recognize is the power of story. Right there is it's a teaching tool. It's a source of meaning making, identity formation, and sometimes good or bad propaganda. And so if you have then systems telling these stories often on repeat, telling you who a person is, of their value, of their contribution to the wider society, ultimately you'll believe them, you'll repeat them. And if we don't interrupt, disrupt, and then present an alternative story, also then allow those who are being talked about to actually talk about themselves, what we have then are some folks who historically have proven you're not about us and can't fully be trusted, controlling the narrative. And we spend our life fighting against that. And so repair within this means that we get to retrain future generations to see, especially within the Black community, to see themselves as beautiful, worthy culture makers that we already are, without then waiting for a yes and confirmation from these systems that say otherwise. So that's what I feel like the importance is there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's beautifully stated. Particularly interested too in your thoughts, Vinikia. We're talking a lot about the ways in which history has harmed and the ways in which our current media system perpetuates that harm. When we try to envision a different future, a world with a just media system, what kinds of tools, ingredients, structures do we need to build to get to that kind of repair?
First and foremost, we have to believe, we have to know, we have to fully have it rooted in our hearts that it is possible. It doesn't have to be this way, and it won't always be this way. But when it comes down to the things that are necessary, I would talk then again about what I talked about, the reckoning. There's the cognitive dissonance and some of the paradigm shifting that needs to happen, right? There needs to be an acknowledgement of all the wrongdoing, even if it wasn't direct, some of the indirect things, and taking ownership of that, and how we've helped perpetuate certain harmful systems. I would say then it's not enough to just say sorry. And all these years later, I kudos to all the folks who have issued public apologies and public statements, had their diversity panels and all of these things. But just doing a statement without then doing the work to back it up is not going to help us solve this or move forward. So accountability, speaking about your next steps, and then having folks who will hold you accountable to those things, help guide you along within those things, I would say is also necessary as we address and redress some of the initial hurt, harm, and like you said, dream of these new worlds. I think about Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who talks about abolition as not just a matter of absence, but a matter of presence. So we can say what should no longer exist, what should no longer take place within our spaces, but what do we actually then infuse into them that breed the love, support, and truly communal aspect that we long for? So I would say within the fight for reparations, liberation, now and to come, all of those ingredients are needed.
Thanks.
And lastly, I'm sorry, Mother Ella Baker talks about people power. The people are needed. So even within the sign-on petition that we're asking people to do, that push, that collective saying, we believe in this thing, people who then organize, form these spaces, so organizations who then sign on to this, we need your voice added to this call. That was my final word.
Yeah, yeah. If you're just joining us, the petition that Vinikia is talking about is a petition we're looking for folks to sign on and share, that will be asking the FCC to really reckon with its own history of pursuing policies that have upheld and continue to uphold white supremacy in our media system. And Joe, as you mentioned, this isn't the first time that folks are talking to the FCC about this. But in July, U.S. Representatives Jamal Bowman, Yvette Clarke, and Brenda Lawrence led 25 lawmakers in calling on the FCC to investigate its history of racist policymaking. We absolutely need people power. That's why we're asking folks to sign this petition, which you can find in the comments of this video. But can you tell us all, how important is it for lawmakers to also weigh in and publicly recognize and address these issues?
I mean, obviously, it's critical. I agree with Vinikia. Everything Vinikia was said. You know, the idea like it's hard to get members of Congress to take action without support, public support, the support from the community, and that's part of the thing we're working on with the building of the consortium. But also, even though there's always has been, every time I've been working at Free Press for a while, that there are good members of Congress, and there are members, there are staffers who are there's many staffers I think who are there because they believe in the mission as well, and not enough, obviously not nearly enough folks who believe in reparations, who believe in the climate crisis, right, and want to do something about it. And we've been fortunate enough at Free Press through the years to actually work with different members of Congress, but really like their staffers who are able to push their members to take action. And so having like Congressman Jamal Bowman, we actually did a Facebook Live with him when he released the letter, and he spoke about this issue. It was very from the heart, like how important media reparations is and his belief in it. And so having a member like Congressman Bowman and others in our corner, it has the chance to engage the public, also to get greater public support, to believe what Vinikia is saying, that political change is possible, right? It's always very easy to get discouraged. I understand it, from that political change is not possible, right? But obviously, part of our work is to believe that political change is possible, that we can create these new worlds, as Vinikia is saying. And when we have support from key members of Congress who are fighting with us, and particularly also their staffers, staffers are critical in working with Congress. It helps to elevate this issue. AP wrote a big story about his letter, and it got a lot of national attention to create greater public awareness that this is actually an issue we can fight for. The idea that we're visibilizing the media system. Folks often just think about representation, which is critically important, but the idea there are structures and policies around this that actually visibilize that there is a media system that could be dismantled, that could be changed, that could be altered, that needs to be altered, we need to reckon with in order to have not just a just media system, but a reparative media system, So that's why this petition is critically important. that people sign on, because it's also in support of the congressman's call. It gives him political support, that what he is saying that has broad public support as well. And so, we work hand in hand. Like his call helps us, but also us signing this petition also strengthens members of Congress who are fighting for us to. And again, we're just dealing with the reckoning part. We're just dealing with the reckoning part. We're not even dealing with the repair yet. So just the reckoning, and the reckon. And this, I'll stop here to say, like, it's inevitable. Either like, I'll just say, like, this whole multiracial democracy narrative that you hear about, is it possible, right? And that is the struggle of this country, right? And the idea of in this area, when it deals with the media system and the narratives we tell, is central to creating the kind of changes that we need politically on all these other issues, because all these other issues around policy is a narrative struggle, is a narrative fight on who deserves to be helped, who is criminalized, who's the other. And so if we're able to change the narrative, not just in the media, the result of policies all across the board to help everyday people, everyday black folks in the black community will be altered as well. So that's the dream, The
dream.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I think that's such an important note about the power of people as well as the power of stories, as Vinikia was saying. I'm going to wrap us soon, but wanted to make sure to spend a little bit of time here at the end talking about how right now we here at Free Press and the Media 2070 team are in the middle of a week of action to push the FCC to reckon with its harmful history and to chart a path towards repair. How can our viewers get involved this week?
Yes, so a call to activity by activists. We, since Tuesday, have been calling people to sign and share the petition. If you're here, you're already a part of the week of action by watching this live and possibly tweeting about it. Tomorrow, myself and Alicia Bell will be hosting an Instagram live talking about the recipe, the ingredients needed to make reparations possible, believing that it should be irresistible. So attracting people within that. That'll start at 6 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And then lastly, again, a call to share the petition by tagging 3 of your friends, 3 of your people who should know about this and who could possibly push this thing forward. And so that is the week of action. We believe that these things are possible, but it does take that activity of the masses to move this thing forward. So follow Media 2070 on Facebook and Instagram to learn more and to keep up to date with all that we're doing here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining me today, Joe and Vinikia.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dana.
Awesome. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in today to Free Press Live, your source for news and updates from the world of communications rights. Free Press Live airs every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, live via Facebook and YouTube. You can learn more about our work and how you can take action at freepress.net. Also important, Free Press doesn't accept any funding from government or corporations, so you can help keep our work going by donating now at freepress.net/donate. Thanks so much. Have a great day.